Get full episodes of The Damage Report as a podcast on iTunes and Android, and you can watch the live show every weekday on YouTube TV. Showdown on the floor of the Senate, mainly led by Bernie Sanders, actually, over the future of the U.S. involvement in the Saudi war on Yemen. To talk about both that and other potential options to get us out of that conflict, I am very happy to be joined on the show by Mark Weisbrot, co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Very glad to have you here. So as I said in that intro, we have Bernie Sanders, who is leading this push to separate us from our involvement in that conflict. But before we get into that and some of the other potential options, if you could just let us know, I don't know how much the US media and regular people across the country are sort of following that conflict. What is actually going on in Yemen right now? How bad is it?
Well, it is really bad. And I'm glad you used the word involvement, by the way. That's a word that you don't really hear much or see in the media. They usually say complicity or support. But the United States military is really involved. They're refueling the planes in midair, which is essential to the bombing that the Saudi and UAE planes are doing. And they're targeting, they're providing intelligence, logistics. So the US military is involved, and that's the basis of this bill. But about how bad it is first, the UN has said it's the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, that 14 million people are on the brink of famine. Tens of thousands of children have already died. And there's a cholera epidemic that has killed thousands of people. And all of this is a result of the war. The Saudis and the UAE have actually used mass starvation of a weapon. They've cut off, they've blockaded supplies, food imports from coming in, and they've bombed infrastructure. Water infrastructure, that's part of the reason for the cholera epidemic. And also just the cutoff of food. And so these are the kinds of things that should never be allowed to happen. And of course, the U.S. military should not be participating in it at all, no matter what.
Well, thankfully, there are some politicians that are pushing to cut off our involvement in that conflict. As I said, Bernie Sanders is going to be he's going to be making a move. I believe today, actually. There's this war powers resolution in the Senate and in the House. What is actually being done, and how likely is it that you think something could be passed that Trump would actually abide by, that we would cut off our involvement in that war?
Well, it's very likely that these bills can pass. And it is the law that he would have to cut off the U.S. military involvement if these bills pass. So in the Senate, the one you mentioned, I think is going to come up for a vote tomorrow, but sometime this week. This is led by Bernie Sanders and Mike Lee from Utah. And you have 5 Republicans who are going to vote for it. So if the Democrats hold, that is, if none of the Democrats defect this time, it will pass. And in the House, of course, you have this now supported by all the leadership in the House, including Pelosi, but the leaders of the various committees, Judiciary, Appropriations, Intelligence, Foreign Affairs. So these, this could pass in the House as well. And this is the law. A lot of people don't know this, but there's the Constitution, of course, says that Congress has the say on matters of war and peace. That's in Article 1. But also you have the 1973 War Powers Resolution, which reemphasized that and spelled out that when the president introduces forces into hostilities, as the Trump has done in this war, they have to, and the Congress can invoke this War Powers Resolution of 1973 to cut it off, to say you have to get out, and so this is why you see these efforts from the administration, the people who support this war, they've been kind of getting more desperate about it because they don't want this to happen. And they also don't, the Pentagon's lobbying very hard because they don't want this precedent. All these people who believe that the president should be able to wage war without the consent of Congress are all very much worried about this, not only because of the war, but because it's the Congress exercising its constitutional authority and using the War Powers Resolution, which provides, has some special provisions. For example, they can't block this vote in the Senate. That's why it has to happen. It has special provisions for Congress to use its constitutional authority to cut off U.S. Military involvement in this really genocidal war that the Saudis and their allies are carrying out.
Yeah, certainly anyone that wants the presidency to have more and more, unilateral control over this is going to be worried about setting any kind of precedent in this war. But I am curious, considering how bad the conflict is, the human toll that we're seeing, although the media doesn't talk about it that much. I am curious about the context. So the killing of Jamal Khashoggi just a little bit more than I guess a month and a half ago at this point, apparently sanctioned by the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. That got quite a bit of media coverage for at least a few weeks. Do you think that killing, and obviously how bad it makes Saudi Arabia and its government look, has that helped at all to push people in the direction of cutting off our involvement?
Well, it's made some difference in terms of all the bad press that Saudi Arabia is getting, and Yemen has been mentioned. But the thing that really wasn't getting much press and still doesn't get very much is that the Congress has these two bills. They've been doing this since November of last year. And so this has been an ongoing struggle, and it's been getting closer, and each vote that takes place brings us closer to getting out. And the media has mostly ignored the Congress, even though they've reported more and more on Yemen. And so that's the problem. And luckily you have thousands of people across the country working on this, and people calling their senators right now. And that's the thing that everybody's being asked to do, is to call their senators and make sure they vote for this in the Senate. Okay. And then of course it'll come back in the House as well. But this has really been the struggle. I think it's not because anybody supports this war. There's very few people support this war. It was just a poll showing the public doesn't support the war, and I think most of the journalists don't support the war. The New York Times editorial board has written more than one editorial where they condemned U.S. Participation in the war. And so I think it's a lot is that many journalists and editors are not used to the idea of Congress really deciding these things. Mm-hmm. And that's what people have to get used to. This is the Constitution, this is the law, and the Congress has the say, and that's what's going to happen.
And hopefully at some point this week we'll know what the future of at least the Senate side of this will actually be. Mark Weisbrot, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for watching this clip from The Damage Report. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and ring the bell on YouTube to get notifications of our new videos. And of course, you can catch the full Damage Report live every weekday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific on TYT Network on YouTube TV.